Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwantner and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll talk about 7 simple quota practices to skyrocket your sales. And you in listen-only mode, however, we want to listen to you. You can communicate with us through the chat function, and please feel free to type in questions as you think of them or make comments, and let's just jump right in and let's talk about the agenda. If you go to the next slide. We'll talk about the market realities in territory and quota planning. We'll talk about what we call the parent-child paradigm when it comes to setting quota. And we talk about, we share 7 tips to improve territory alignment and quota distribution. And we have some key takeaways after that. And then we reserve some room for Q&A. It's also my pleasure to introduce Purnima Mohandas. She is the product marketing manager of Calidus Cloud. And if you want to get in touch with her, here's her email address. Welcome, Purnima.
Thank you, Gerhard.
So let me set the stage, and let's talk about the overall picture, if you will, the 100,000-foot view. Territory and quota planning is underserved. It is a manual process. There's little data insight, and there is a study from Ian Hewitt that says that 85% of companies today use Excel or similar spreadsheet software for the quota setting process. So as you know, that leads to errors. It takes very long, sometimes in many companies as much as 4 to 6 months, during which time your reps are not the most productive because they're engaged in shadow accounting. They want to know when they get paid. It's very labor intensive. We know from a large multinational company that we spoke to that they said they have 65 people managing Excel spreadsheets. Worst of all, there's little or no data insight that's needed by field management. So let's talk about the calculating the correct quotas. It's not easy. According to the Alexander Group's annual sales compensation trend survey in 2015, 59% of companies said correct goal/quota setting is the #1 challenge facing the sales compensation program. However, you said it, there is bound to be resistance. There's a lot of noise. People are going to be unhappy, but at the same time, this is the start of the year, and it's coming around very quickly. And you want sales to be on top of their game, and you want them to be motivated to meet their goals and set their targets. So that is something to keep in mind as you plan for 2016. The next big issue here is that territory management is conflicting and complicated, and it doesn't need to be that way. It's a convoluted exercise at best, which does often not justify that level of effort. It's often difficult to find logic behind defining territories by geography, by company size, by zip code, etc. And the logic itself is not consistent across the organization. 50% of companies say that they do not have a consistent process for quota setting across business units and geographies. And that's according to an Aon Hewitt survey. And they're sort of the thought leaders in that space. The other issue is that territory management and quota planning often involves rework. So after months of backbreaking work, when you finally rolled out the territory and quota plans for your sales force, and you think you can take a few days off and go to the mountains, then starts the pushback. You're suddenly back to the drawing board. And what's worse, you probably have forgotten many of the assumptions and the logic used to arrive at many of those numbers. So you have no record of who made what decision and why. There's another research firm, Serious Decisions, and they said that 42% of sales reps, sales ops leaders, they experience significant issues after launching a quota plan. And why is this happening? Because there isn't enough collaboration with the sales force during the territory planning and quota setting process. So it's a communications issue. And it's also a psychological issue. When you think about it, sales reps are often excluded in the parent-child paradigm. Did anyone ask the rep if he or she was okay with their quota? Many times reps don't understand how their quotas are calculated. And that leaves them in sort of in an inferior position, a defensive position. And they have questions about how it was calculated. They have concerns about whether it's fair. They wonder whether it is achievable, whether it's realistic. And many times companies tend to overburden the top performers because the top performers, they say, yeah, I can do that. I can even exceed it. But the average rep who had a good year may not do so well in the next because his quota may be doubled and the territory may be cut in half. But in many companies, reps are just handed the quota with no avenue or opportunity for input, let alone achieving the buy-in. So when reps find their quota unobtainable and unfair, they tend to get demotivated, and there's a risk that they may leave the company. And that leads to involuntary attrition, which is already very high among salespeople. Salespeople turnover on average in this country is over 30%, and in some industries it's 100%. So the question is, do you ever talk to your sales reps when it comes to quota setting? And again, Hewitt Quota Practices Survey, according to that survey, only 7% of companies set quotas using the bottom-up methodology, wherein quotas are based on sales rep input, and they talk about client opportunity. And approximately 45% of companies use no bottom-up data to set and allocate quotas. So this process is hard, and it can easily fail unless it's managed with strong discipline, managed by smart people, and there is a better way to do that. And we're going to get to that very quickly when Pormina is taking over. So the question is, how many reps actually make quota? And CSO Insights, those people, they've done those surveys for many, many years. 58% of reps make quota in 2014. And that is not trending up. Within this, there's a great variance between the bottom 30% of companies and the top 10% of companies. So when you drill down, the bottom 30% of companies, only 42% of their reps make quota. And in the top 10%, those are the what Jim Dickey calls the level 4 companies, 75% of reps meet quota. So the question is, what are some of the reasons for this variance? Is it process? Is it tools? Is it the use of data? Or is it performance monitoring? Because some people do get it right. The other issue is companies are leaving money at the table. Gartner Group says enterprises will miss the equivalent of up to 10% of annual sales lost, so opportunities lost that could have been captured through the improved management processes, which include compensation objective, quota management, territory management, appraisal, evaluation management, or training management, also hiring and onboarding, sales coaching, and gamification. So there is a lot of science around that, and that sales is part science, it's part art, and we need to get our arms around aligning people, process, and technology to improve that process. But with manual processes, you really have no sense of what opportunities you're losing out on. So there's a Kellogg study that shows how good territory alignment can deliver multiple benefits, such as improved customer coverage, increased sales. It fosters fair performance evaluation for sales reps and better reward systems. And it also, of course, it lowers travel costs. So there are better ways. So the bottom line is that everybody is running behind the realities. And everybody talks in the technology industry, we're moving from a reactive sales organization to a predictive sales organization. In a predictive sales organization, they connect better with the buyer. They have enough data to forecast much better, and they have better analytics. They can design quota structures and compensation plans based on predictive analytics, and that is where we are leading. That's where we are going. And if you want to be in those 75% of those companies, the companies that achieve 75% of their quota, that is the next level of success. And just imagine if you can improve your quota attainment by 20% or by 30%. It's all possible. And thanks to Purnima, we are going to share with you 7 simple tips to improve territory and quota planning. I hand it over to you. Share your wisdom.
Great. Good morning, everybody. This is Purnima from Caldas Cloud. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Gerhard, for giving us a great sense of the lay of the land and some of the problems that sales operations and sales leadership faces. So as promised, we want to dive straight into 7 simple tips that can improve territory and quota planning. Tip number 1, streamline the process. Make it more data-driven. Ask yourselves, what is the process that you follow today for quota setting? A majority of companies you see will follow an approach of baseline plus, say, 5% growth, because that is probably the easiest way to go. But is that really the optimum? Because we are surrounded by data. We are literally drowning in data today. And in the 21st century, isn't it almost criminal not to put all that good data to use? So you could use internal data, external data, forward-looking data, backward-looking data to really make your quotas truly reflective and in tune with the marketplace. What all internal data do you have? For sure, you have historical sales data. Be sure to use about 3 years of it so that it helps iron out all the windfall years. Forward-looking data resides in your CRM system with the real opportunities that are there in the sales pipeline. For external data, you could use market data, penetration data. Seasonality is another great one to use, especially for highly seasonal industries like retail or insurance. Now, marrying all these different streams of data from varied sources into myriad spreadsheets might seem like a formidable challenge. But nowadays, fortunately, there are applications out there that allow you to consume and ingest all this data, process it, and recommend quotas and optimize territories. And why should you use all this data? What's the end result? What's the benefit to you? Essentially, you can ensure that your sales rep, Sally the sales rep who had like a stellar year last year, is not penalized for her performance, right? You don't want to penalize your top performers. You don't want to give her a double territory like Gerhard mentioned earlier, just because she had a great year last year and set her up for failure. You want to factor in not just her past performance, but also the opportunities that lie ahead of her and really make the quota calculation more scientific. This can also help you push up revenues. Tip number 2, collaborate with sales. Now, Gerhard mentioned earlier about the parent-child paradigm. Often companies talk down to sales reps, treat them in an infantile manner. And majority of companies, sales operations or sales leadership will just calculate the quotas and push it down sales reps' throats. Now this allows bias to creep in because sales managers might always favor their favorites, give them the best territories. This means that the best sales reps are not doing so well, not just because of their ability to sell and be eloquent, talking value to the customer, but also because they are given the best territories. And this can create resentment in the organization. Do you talk to your sales reps? Do you ask them, how do you feel about your quota? Is it realistic to you? Is it attainable? Now, one of the best ways to collaborate with your sales reps is to consider the bottom-up quota setting methodology. As you all might very well know, there are basically two methodologies for quota setting. Top-down methodology, where sales management essentially sets the quota and passes it down the chain of command. There's no say for the sales rep. The second methodology is the bottom-up methodology, wherein sales managers get together with individual sales reps, have discussions, have conversations about what makes a realistic quota, then roll it up for further negotiations and approvals up the chain of command all the way to the head of sales. So what is the benefit of using bottom-up quota setting methodology? It's beneficial both for the company as well as the sales rep, because the company can really tap into the intimate knowledge that only your sales reps have of their customers. So for instance, a company might say, okay, now this sales rep has been working this huge multi-million-dollar deal for the past 6 months with an enterprise high-tech customer in his territory, so let's give him a huge quota. But only the sales rep knows that one of the key decision makers, maybe the CIO, who was involved in that buying cycle for the last 6 months, has suddenly left the company. Right? That has completely put the organization into turmoil. There's no clarity on who is going to take over from him or her. There's no indecision is probably going to be the way forward for that deal. And only your sales rep knows that. So the sales rep has an opportunity to inject that realism into the quota value. And for the sales rep, he also benefits because his morale gets boosted, right? Somebody's actually asking him something. Somebody's listening to him. The organization is listening to him. So he will feel more committed and morally obligated to that quota. As Gerhard mentioned earlier, very few companies go that route because it's really difficult to implement. It takes a lot of discipline. Just imagine you're having hundreds of sales reps or thousands of sales reps, depending on the size of your organization, conversing with their managers, and there's going to be a few back and forth emails following the conversation, and then spreadsheets that are going to be distributed across the organization. Just imagine the gargantuan task ahead for the sales admin who will have to consolidate all those emails and multiple versions of spreadsheets. But there are applications out there today that productize this methodology and allow you to roll it out in a streamlined manner. Tip number 4, communication. Fairly simple thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do. Nobody will debate that. But an Aon Hewitt study showed that the failure to communicate sales quotas and sales methodologies is one of the biggest challenges relating to quota setting for organizations. Now, every organization should communicate sales quotas to sales reps at the beginning of the year, communicate what's the methodology involved. They should also definitely communicate the sales objective for the year. A very specific and measurable sales objective could be, we want to increase our market share for product X by 15% in the Western region. Something so specific so that your entire sales machinery can fall behind it and work towards it. Communication is important, right? And do you communicate? The other key thing to communicate is really the attainment level. How often do you tell your sales reps their attainment level? Is it once a month? Or do you have a self-service system where sales reps can log in and check their performance metrics anytime, anywhere? What about stack rankings? That's a very powerful tool to use that allows sales reps to see how they fare with respect to their peers. So just imagine your sales rep knows that his or her buddy sitting next to him has already attained 90% of quota, and it's only October. But he himself has achieved only 70% of quota. Now he's going to try that much harder to close all the deals that he has in front of him, just so that he can beat his buddy. Because sales reps, by nature, are competitive. And that's a streak that you should be tapping into so that you can improve performance. Documentation is another key thing. An Alexander Group survey found that 50% of companies do not formally document quota policies and practices. So just imagine if your sales admin just left the company. He or she is going to leave your organization with all these formulas and the logic, the assumptions behind it. And how are you going to retrieve all of that back? Tip number 5. Consider monthly targets. So why should you do that? A large section of sales reps don't meet quota. But interestingly, a large section of even sales leaders are not confident of meeting their sales projections. So how do you make those goals more achievable? An overwhelming majority of companies still use annual quotas, but we are seeing an increasing minority of companies who want to set more frequent goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals, even weekly goals based on how long the sales cycle is. So when it's an annual goal, human nature allows you to procrastinate. You tend to worry about it towards the end of the year. And when hundreds of sales reps do that, it puts undue pressure on your company's top line. So give people monthly targets. That makes it much more measurable for them, easy for them to relate to. We hear of a company that tells their sales reps, close at least one deal a day. Sorry, one deal a month. One deal a day would be crazy unless you're in retail, but yeah. One deal a month. So that gives your sales reps a clear direction and goal that they can quickly achieve and track. Tip number 6, treat everybody well, customers and sales. Do you have the information that you need to check for sales coverage and equity in the system? Oftentimes, the information is so scattered that there's limited visibility. This is where reporting can play a big role. Are all your customers getting the best coverage possible? Are there whole territories and accounts that you may have no one assigned to? What reports do you have to ensure that sales coverage is optimum? And improving sales coverage is crucial to driving revenue. You need to take care not just of your customers, but also your sales reps. Do the best accounts go to the best sales reps? Do you have reports that can check for inequities in the system? Maybe average number of accounts per rep, average number of accounts per territory. Are some of the sales reps carrying unattainably high quotas while others have it relatively easy? Tip number 7, marry quotas and compensation. In most companies, this is a natural progression. You design your quotas first, and then you build your comp plans around it. Because you can then factor in your targets, your attainment, your thresholds, all into your comp plan. So it makes sense to have these two processes running together. Tremendous amount of synergies between them. And rich data could move back and forth. By linking these two processes, you not only increase your speed and efficiency, but you can also generate richer reporting, performance metrics, and dashboards. So a sales rep can see not just what his or her attainment is and how they compare to their peers, they can see which products are they successful at selling, which ones are they not so successful at selling. What is the mix of product versus services? And many other important metrics which can help drive performance. You can also stop chasing realities and make that leap into the sphere of the predictive. And predictive analytics can answer important business questions like, if you set your quota in this fashion, what will be the compensation spent? How can I move around my territories in order to produce my compensation spent? Who will be my top performers? Who will be my bottom performers? All key business questions that can help you drive performance, increase revenues, and cut costs. That is the last of my 7 tips. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Gerhard for a wrap-up of all the content that we have gone over and share his thoughts and insights. Over to you, Gerhard.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this interesting information. Before we do all that, maybe we should pick up a couple of questions from the audience. One question that has come up just now was, how does a software solution help with the bottom-up quota planning and getting reps involved?
I can take that.
All right.
So Caldas Cloud, for instance, offers a territory and quota planning solution that productizes bottom-up quota setting methodology. So it's a very prescriptive approach which allows the sales, this collaboration to really happen between sales managers and sales reps, and the entire process is tracked and it's auditable and it's extremely streamlined so that you can efficiently roll it out. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Gerhard?
Well, I totally agree with you. There are a number of questions, and there's one that just came in. Would you recommend readjusting quotas over the year to factor in changed market conditions? So let me add to that question. Are there any best practice studies? I remember a McKinsey study that said when companies plan for more than 6 quarters ahead, they usually have higher profitability than others. So is there a similar study for readjusting quotas over the year?
I have read a study which does talk about, keep readjustment to a minimum in the middle of the year, essentially, because it tends to not be so trusted by the sales reps. They kind of think of it as, are you favoring somebody over somebody else? So that kind of, the study essentially advocated that you restrict mid-year adjustments to a minimum.
Right. So now I totally understand, because it makes salespeople nervous if things are changed, and there are a lot of conversations, and it may not have the desired impact. Here's a question. We need our quotas to roll up to a forecast that the company depends on. That makes sense. So do you have any suggestions on combining both the organization needs and the bottom-up method? I think that's a good question.
I could start off on that, and Gerhard, you can definitely add in. In the
Right.
bottom-up, definitely, like, although you are tapping into, your sales reps' knowledge of individual accounts, there's also the approvals and negotiations that go through every chain of your hierarchy. So there is that influence, if you will, for the sales management to weigh in and say that, hey, but this is our goal as far as corporate is concerned, so you need to, let's negotiate that, and let's agree on something that's more consensual.
Right, right. Well, and I agree that my answer would be that you want to have alignment. When you look at salespeople themselves, that they're sometimes overly optimistic, and sales managers usually cut the salesperson's forecast by about 30%, because they don't believe, they think salespeople have happy ears, or they don't have the data that they possess to realistically appraise what they can do. On the other hand, there are some salespeople that chronically underestimate what the territory can do. I just had an example with a company where the district sales manager, when I asked him, what's your quota for the next quarter? And he says, well, I want to exceed the previous quarter, which was actually the best quarter in the history of the company. And then I said, well, how do you know by what percentage to increase that quota for the next quarter? And their forecast quarter after quarter, and they have an annual forecast. And he came back and said, well, maybe 10%. And I challenged him, and I said, what would happen? What would have to happen if you doubled the quota? And he was totally stunned. And I said, well, what I'd like you to do is to shift from limited thinking, from appraising reality through the rearview mirror, by thinking about the bigger headlights. And so what if you could double it? What would need to change other than that you work smarter? But once he was able to wrap his arms around that gigantic, seemingly impossible goal, he worked up a different plan, improved the process, and had better meetings, a better conversation with his salespeople. And lo and behold, this second quarter that just finished, he was 46% ahead. So what I'm saying is that in the planning process, there's a lot of psychology, a lot of science, and a lot of conversations. And you want to lead people to an unlimited thinking pattern instead of a limited thinking pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. That is an impressive number you just mentioned.
Yeah, it is. And so what I'm saying is that people do not always realize what they're capable of doing. I just read this book by Bill McDermott, Win a Stream, and he talks about a huge kickoff meeting he had where he set some stretch goals for the entire organization that he took over, and he had several thousand salespeople in the room, and he was able to get them on board for a huge increase in sales that nobody believed was possible, but he pulled it off. And I'm going back to the formula. It's a mixture between psychology and science. The next question is, what would you consider the most beneficial aspect of sales performance management software for a small business? And I think that's a great question that should go in your wheelhouse, because you're living this every day.
Yeah, for a small business, I would say it would definitely be coaching. Because coaching is something that, irrespective of the size of your organization, even if you have 1 rep or you have 15 reps, it will definitely lead to higher quota attainment and increase your sales. And the investment for that is it's not a very cost-intensive, exercise. So I would definitely recommend coaching, and in conjunction with coaching, I believe coaching, in order to be effective, really has to be supported by learning. So an e-learning solution that really plugs into your coaching solution is what I would definitely recommend for a small business. Of course, the definition of small business is relative, but that's my recommendation. Anything you'd add to that, Gerhard?
Well, I was just thinking about the different tools that you offer on the Calidus Cloud platform, and I think that for a small business, one of the biggest challenges to get all the messaging right, so that salespeople really have all the information at their fingertips that they need in order to persuade customers. So the speed and the agility of communication is very, very vital, and you don't want to have your salespeople spend hours in getting proposals together, or spend hours in searching for information that they need to inform the customer. So I would shop Calidus for those applications that really well designed for very small businesses up to a big business. Let me read the next question. Prasad is asking, how do you balance salesperson's tendency to minimize the quota and management's tendency to maximize their number? Do you want me to take a stab at that?
Yeah, please go ahead, Gerhard.
Yeah, because Prasad, you're totally right in framing that way. That you're almost describing it like a tug of war, and I think that this leaves this creates a tremendous opportunity for salespeople to understand that whatever they're minimizing comes from a defensive kind of mindset compared to the growth mindset of the sales manager, who has a bigger vision and has a different view of what is possible. So I think that when it comes down to it, the sales success is a result of three factors: the right mindset, the right skill set, and the right tool set. And here we are doing a webinar with a technology company. Obviously, the tool set plays a significant role, but it all begins with the mindset. And there's a wonderful book by Dr. Carol Dweck called The Mindset, and it talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And when you hire salespeople, you do not want to have people on board with a fixed mindset, because they're never going to exceed their number. They're never even going to make their number. You want to have people who have a growth focus, a growth mindset, where they know how to break through barriers and set new records. Those are the people you want to have play on your team. And so whenever you have a tug of war, then you probably have a situation where the sales manager that points at salespeople and saying they're minimizing their quota, that when they point at those salespeople, they really point back at themselves because they made the wrong hiring decision. Gunmina, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. I mean, Prasad, you probably want to look at the personalities that you have. What is the ideal personality of a salesperson? He needs to be optimistic. He needs to be offensive. And if he's defensive about it, you really got to think about, is this the right hire, right? The other piece of advice I would say is link it to incentives. You would, to play around with the variable versus fixed proportion that you have in your compensation structure, right? Because that's the one thing that really drives salespeople is the money. So make it matter, right? That's what I would say.
Well, there's another question that popped up about a compensation plan in different cultures like France. So when you have a US-based company and then you have a French subsidiary, there's a different culture where people are, I lived in France for 2.5 years, and I was just recently in Paris and had conversations with sales leaders. And what struck me is that they're still about 2 years behind in embracing cloud technology. And although France is a wonderful country for innovative technologies, I'm not saying this is systemic, but sales managers are not necessarily very eager to embrace an American-made compensation plan. So there's what I call a cross-cultural conflict, and my solution is always to not to be defensive, but to be curious and find out what is really at the bottom of their motivation, what motivates them. I give you one example. I had recently, I was coaching a sales organization, and salespeople had this big dashboard, and the numbers on and who is number one, who is number two, and what are they doing every month, and the dashboard was sort of their holy grail, and I thought it was limiting, and I said, why don't we sit down and have a conversation with every one of the sales force and say, what are your dreams on a personal level? And one guy's, what do you want for yourself? Those are just numbers, but what do those numbers mean? And the first guy says, well, my dream is to have a house in Umbria in Italy. And the second guy said, I want to heli ski in Alaska. The third woman said, I want to have a vacation home on a lake in Galveston. And the fourth person wanted to lead a yoga workshop in India and bring some friends and have a big party. So I said, why don't you put images on your computer screens and print them out, and next to the dashboard you have a dream wall. So you become the dream team and you support each other, and the conversations totally changed that moment, because what happened is that the guy who wanted the house in Umbria that costs €1.5 million realized that his 1.5 million sales quota is not going to be good enough. He needs to bump it up to $4 or $5 million a year. Now, how do you do that? What is your strategy? He says, we'll sell to bigger accounts, and I sell more. And I said, it's a great direction. What do you know about major account selling? He says, not much. And I said, well, here's an opportunity to learn, to get curious, buy a book, join the Strategic Account Management Association, and you fulfill your dreams, and you get closer to your dreams. So that's one way to tap in that's universal. Again, there are many examples that American companies have had cross-cultural managers in foreign organizations, and the goal is not to Americanize another country. The goal is to take the best assets from both cultures and unite them and roll it into your local compensation plan. What do you think, Mina?
I agree, and that was a great, colorful story that you just shared. I have images of Umbria and the Alps right in front of me right now, and I think that is the way to go, right? You don't want to impose your methodology or your process on every BU across the globe, but really kind of take a more integrated approach, see what appeals to them, what makes sense for that geography, and really have a happy marriage between different processes, what is being followed in HQ vis-a-vis what is being followed and what makes sense and what is going to be more appealing to another geo.
Well, there's a wonderful comment. I want to read it. Oh my God, friends are vision boarding this weekend with wine. Thank you for that response. When I'm back in Corsica, we'll deal with this. Wow. So it totally resonates that people want to find more meaning in work and they want to have more fun. Here's another quick question. Does Calidus offer sales coaching face-to-face or virtual? I think that's a good question. What are your capabilities that you're offering?
Yes, so we specialize in what is called field coaching. So that is essentially where the sales manager actually accompanies the sales rep in a ride-along when the sales rep is engaging with the customer. So it's one-on-one, it can be face-to-face, so the sales manager can actually capture those mobile moments and do the coaching session while on the go on an iPad or his smartphone, right? So that's what our coaching solution is specialized in. Having said that, some of our customers do use it in their call center as well to listen to the conversations that are happening and offer coaching sessions based on that.
Well, there's another Calidus question. What modules in Calidus help sales ops share the data needed to have informed conversations? That's part one of the question. Part two of the question are there case studies using Calidus? I think that's, I'd love to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, sure. So the first part of the question was about sales operations and increasing the knowledge that you have when you're talking to.
Yeah, what modules in Calidus help share the data needed to have the conversation? Because in many organizations, they're ready to have the conversation, but they have a fuzzy data set.
Yes, yes. So if you look at our territory and quota application, so there are multiple views of it. So there's a view for the sales rep, which involves a dashboard, performance metrics. He can see how he's faring, he or she is faring, different dashboards and metrics that really help improve transparency across the organization, right? There's also, the sales rep can also engage in conversations with their sales managers as well as the admin, accept quotas, put a question in regarding a particular quota or ask for a change for a quota. Now the sales manager, there's a separate view for the sales manager, and all this is based, is secure with role-based security so that you only see what deals with your work. But so the sales manager can go in and allocate quotas and see how the quota distribution process is progressing. He can also see. Sorry, did you want to?
They all have the same data set to look at.
Yes, yes, and the sales admin can see the entire view, the entire landscape, right?
Right.
So how has the distribution process progressed? What percentage of people have accepted their quotas? What percentage are pending acceptance? So an entire, 10,000-foot view of the entire territory and quota process.
Got it. It makes sense.
I hope that answers the question.
So let me summarize the key takeaways, and then we have room for a couple more questions. So we talked about the data, and in many companies, companies silo the data, and they have multiple systems. So we want to use data, metrics, and trends to make scientific quota calculations, and that is the stepping stone up to predictive analytics. The next one is you want to trust your salespeople. You're training your salespeople to establish trust with their customers. So you cannot have a psychologically healthy relationship with your salespeople when you don't trust them, when you infantilize them by shoving quotas down their throat. So you want to tap into the knowledge that they have on customer accounts. So bring your salespeople into the fold. Ask for their opinion. Ask for their views on what they can do in their territory, and help them to what I call no-limit thinking, where you put everything on the table and let them move from fantasy and then bring them back to reality. Let them dream, make them hungry, make them think big, and then negotiate with them as you set the quota. And your role is to be sort of the coach and of a high performer. So if you have high expectations of salespeople, and you deal with them as if they were peers and adults and not children, you're going to get a lot better results. The next is that you want to communicate to your sales force on quota policies and practices. People want to understand the policy. They want to understand the reason behind the policy. They want to understand the practices. So if you have a sales objective for the year, make it known. Create the environment of transparency. You know, that's the age we live in. Everything is transparent. Everything is out in the open. And a transparent organization has a lot less, fewer conversations about irrelevant things and personality issues, but they can focus on moving business forward. So you want to make the performance metrics available anytime, anywhere, so that everybody understands it, and that will help drive the motivation you need. You want to empower your salespeople to be competitive, and you want to give them the tools where they can go to their next level of performance. The next part is communication. You know, there's never enough communication when it comes to quota and compensation. And if you, as a manager, I think the rule of thumb is you have to repeat yourself about 6 times before you can be reasonably sure that 80% of your salespeople have understood everything. You cannot, achieve perfection there. Don't chase realities. Look for predictive capabilities that can help you improve performance, that helps you cut costs, drive top-line growth for your organization. And don't look in the rearview mirror to predict the future. That is an old model. You know, a lot of 20 years ago, forecasts were made by looking at a 5-year trend and then extending the trend. It's not happening. That practice is dead. We got a couple more questions. Can you model the assumptions and payouts before allocating? Juanmina, what's your take on that?
Right. So you can, to a limited extent, so you can model what your payout will be based on what your territories, how your territories are aligned today, and how it can be optimized to, reduce your spend. Yes.
Got it. So I want to ask you a more generic question that I'm a little confused as to the notion of predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is a term that I think comes from marketing, and then it was brought into sales operation. So how do you define predictive analytics within Calidus? I'd like to understand that.
Sure. So incentives, I would say, is at the heart of our business. And we have, as you might very well know, we have grown over the last 2-3 years, having consumed several companies that we have, through inorganic growth. And we've tried to tie all these different products into our incentive suite. And the entire suite is really made sweeter, if you will, and brought
right.
together but with the predictive analytics platform, right? Because you are then giving the sales rep a dashboard. Just imagine this: a sales rep has a dashboard wherein he can see not only what his attainment is today, what it was for the past 3 quarters, but he can see what learning modules he should take in order to increase his attainment, right?
Right.
He can see where his attainment is going to be if he continues in this, continues in the same fashion. What is his, right? What is the mix of products that he's selling today, and what mix should he have if he has, if he wants to increase his compensation?
So there's one subject we haven't been dealing with, and hold on, there's another question that came in. How do you see cloud-based sales performance management software as opposed to on-premise software? A company is gearing more towards the cloud. Hella, that is the name of the questioner. I firmly believe that the cloud is the future, and on-premise is a very expensive and outmoded concept. That's my view. Cormina, what's your take?
I completely agree. Of course, coming from a cloud company, I'm going to be biased, but cloud is the way to go. We are seeing huge adoption in the United States and increasing adoption in other geographies as well. But just the flexibility it gives you, of course, the expense, like you mentioned, those are legacy systems, are expensive to maintain. You often don't even have, for instance, in a vertical that we really focus on a lot, insurance. They're not able to maintain their legacy systems because COBOL programmers are in short supply. So, do you really want to be at the expense of shortening, a talent supply? Or do you want to keep up with the times and move forward, right? Because in earlier years, every time there was a release in a cloud, in an on-premise technology company, that was viewed as something terrible that the customer had to deal with. But today, releases in a cloud company, releases are absolutely no problem for the customers. Rather, they view it favorably because that shows that your cloud company is innovating and you can keep up with the times.
Yeah, and there's a Nadia Satella, from the CEO of Microsoft, had a wonderful quote at Dreamforce. He was at a reception and I heard him speak, and his quote was that the market does not reward tradition. The market rewards innovation. And the cloud is where all the innovations are happening right now. And I see that we're getting over our time limit. We have recorded this conversation. Can you advance to the next slide to share our contact information? I could go on for another 2 hours, really. So if anybody has more questions, we'd be happy to get back with you. You can reach me at feedback@sellingpower.com, and I get that, and I'd be happy to respond. Or you can go to info@CalidusCloud, and Cormina and her team will be happy to answer those questions. We recorded this with the purpose that you can see it again. A number of people have asked if we do that. And there's one final question, Cormina. How do we address security issues associated with public cloud in Calidus? I think that's a good question to end with.
Sure, yeah. So security is something that is our first priority in Calidus Cloud, and this is not something we want our customers to worry about. It is something that we take care of, and we have an approach which is called the Defense in-Depth approach, wherein there is security embedded not just at the application level, but at multiple levels. So whether it's in your middleware, whether it's in your data center, there's surveillance around the clock, 24/7 in the data centers, as well as video surveillance, right? So security is really important to us, and it is taken care of with the utmost importance. There is also, if you look at the applications themselves, there's also role-based security so that only the sales rep sees what deals with his work and the sales manager sees what deals with her sphere of work, right? Whereas the admin can administer the entire organization and see back-end capabilities as well. So there's, security at every level.
Well, that's wonderful. I feel very secure with Calidus, and I want to thank you for sharing those 7 wonderful ideas, and I want to thank the audience for asking the wonderful questions and being so engaged. And we'll be available for more questions if you want to email us. Mina, I'll let you have the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerhard. That was great. It was great chatting with you. It's almost, very engaging and great insights and anecdotes. And thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time out of your day today and spending it with us. We hope to, talk to you soon and have a great rest of the day.
Managed with strong discipline, managed by smart people, and there is a better way to do that, and we're going to get to that very quickly when Mina is taking over. So the question is, how many reps actually make quota? And CSO Insights, those people, they've done those surveys for many, many years. 58% of reps make quota in 2014, and that is not trending up. Within this, there's a great variance between the bottom 30% of companies and the top 10% of companies. So when you drill down, the bottom 30% of companies, only 42% of their reps make quota. And in the top 10%, those are the what Jim Dickey calls the level 4 companies, 75% of reps meet quota. So the question is, what are some of the reasons for this variance? Is it process? Is it tools? Is it the use of data? Or is it performance monitoring? Because some people do get it right. The other issue is companies are leaving money at the table. Gartner Group says enterprises will miss the equivalent of up to 10% of annual sales lost. So opportunities lost that could have been captured through the improved management processes, which include compensation objective, quota management, territory management, appraisal, evaluation management, or training management, also hiring and onboarding, sales coaching, and gamification. So there is a lot of science around that, and you know that sales is part science, it's part art. And we need to it. That says that 85% of companies today use Excel or similar spreadsheet software for the quota setting process. So as you know, that leads to errors. It takes very long, sometimes in many companies as much as 4 to 6 months, during which time your reps are not the most productive because they're engaged in shadow accounting. They want to know when they get paid. It's very labor intensive. We know from a large multinational company that we spoke to that they said they have 65 people managing Excel spreadsheets. Worst of all, there's little or no data insight that's needed by field management. So let's talk about the calculating the correct quotas. It's not easy. According to the Alexander Group's annual sales compensation trend survey in 2015, 59% of companies said correct goal/quota setting is the #1 challenge facing the sales compensation program. However, you said it, there is bound to be resistance. There's a lot of noise. People are going to be unhappy, but at the same time, this is the start of the year, and it's coming around very quickly. And you want sales to be on top of their game, and you want them to be motivated to meet their goals and set their targets. So that is something to keep in mind as you plan for 2016. The next big issue here is that territory management is conflicting and complicated, and it doesn't need to be that way. It's a convoluted exercise at best, which does often not justify that level of effort. It's often difficult to find logic behind defining territories by geography, by company size, by zip code, etc. And the logic itself is not consistent across the organization. 50% of companies say that they do not have a consistent process for quota setting across business units and geographies. And that's according to an Aon Hewitt survey, and they're sort of the thought leaders in that space. The other issue is that territory management and quota planning often involves rework. So after months of backbreaking work, when you finally rolled out the territory and quota plans for your sales force, and you think you can take a few days off and go to the mountains, then starts the pushback. You're suddenly back to the drawing board. And what's worse, you probably have forgotten many of the assumptions and the logic used to arrive at many of those numbers. So you have no record of who made what decision and why. There's another research firm, Serious Decisions, and they said that 42% of sales reps, sales up leaders, they experience significant issues after launching a quota plan. And why is this happening? Because there isn't enough collaboration with the sales force during the territory planning and quota setting process. So it's a communications issue. And it's also a psychological issue. When you think about it, sales reps are often excluded in the parent-child paradigm. Did anyone ask the rep if he or she was okay with their quota? Many times reps don't understand how their quotas are calculated, and that leaves them in sort of in an inferior position, a defensive position, and they have questions about how it was calculated. They have concerns about whether it's fair. They wonder whether it is achievable, whether it's realistic. And many times companies tend to overburden the top performers, because the top performers, they say, yeah, I can do that. I can even exceed it. But the average rep who had a good year may not do so well in the next, because his quota may be doubled and the territory may be cut in half. But in many companies, reps are just handed the quota with no avenue or opportunity for input, let alone achieving the buy-in. So when reps find their quota unobtainable and unfair, you know, they tend to get demotivated, and there's a risk that they may leave the company. And that leads to involuntary attrition, which is already very high among salespeople. Salespeople turnover on average in this country is over 30%, and in some industries it's 100%. So the question is, do you ever talk to your sales reps when it comes to quota setting? And again, Hewitt Quota Practices Survey, according to that survey, only 7% of companies set quotas using the bottom-up methodology, wherein quotas are based on sales rep input, and they talk about client opportunity. And approximately 45% of companies use no bottom-up data to set and allocate quotas. So this process is hard, and it can easily fail unless it's managed. Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwantner, and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll talk about 7 simple quota practices to skyrocket your sales. And you in listen-only mode. However, we want to listen to you. You can communicate with us through the chat function, and please feel free to type in questions as you think of them or make comments, and let's just jump right in and let's talk about the agenda. If you go to the next slide. We'll talk about the market realities in territory and quota planning. We'll talk about what we call the parent-child paradigm when it comes to setting quota. And we talk about, we share 7 tips to improve territory alignment and quota distribution. And we have some key takeaways after that. And then we reserve some room for Q&A. It's also my pleasure to introduce Purnima Mohandas. She is the product marketing manager of Calidus Cloud. And if you want to get in touch with her, here's her email address. Welcome, Purnima.
Thank you, Gerhard.
So let me set the stage, and let's talk about the overall picture, if you will, the 100,000-foot view. Territory and quota planning is underserved. It is a manual process. There's little data insight, and there is a study from Ian Hume